Okay, I think we are going to get started. We are real excited about the session today. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time for one of these, I thought I'd give you a little background. This is part of our How to Get More Out of ServiceNow series. And we started this a few months back. This is actually the third in our series. The first two we did, one was about what our top favorite things were in the latest Quebec build. And the other one that we did just about a month ago was around CMDB. If you didn't get to attend those and would love to get a recording to those, just hit us up here in the chat today. We'll make sure we follow up with some links for you. But today, specifically, it's about IT business management. And this one is pretty close to the heart for all of us. So CDW, I'll share just a moment about who we are and what we are, but we are the #1 global elite partner for ServiceNow. And today we're going to dive right into ITBM, but many know this, but not everybody. We're also a significant user of the platform. We've been a ServiceNow customer going back to 2013. And most recently, a lot of our new gains have been happening in the ITBM space. So you'll hear not only some best practices around IT business management from us as a leading partner, you're also going to hear some stories about how we're leveraging it, how we're using it for our own corporate use. IT project management's both internal and for external customer projects. So to that end, let me kick it off and share a little bit of background for you about our practice here. First off, I mentioned already, and Josh, if you can advance the slide here, that'd be great. I mentioned already that we are a leading partner of ServiceNow. We've been in the practice for some time, and ultimately, we've done everything from basic ServiceNow implementations. We've been doing it for over 8 years, as well as process design and things that we can work around a client's people and process side of the equation. So when we look at any project, we talk about the 3 Ps: people, process, and platform. When you work with CDW around ServiceNow, you'll see us always leading with the dialogue around people and process. And advisory services is a key component of that. Mara, who's one of our speakers today, she comes from that group. She'll talk a little bit about how getting that process side down so that we can also move forward with really effective configuration of ServiceNow from a technology perspective. So on those things, I'll lead by talking about the 2 speakers that we have today. Mara Southard, already mentioned her. She'll be speaking a little bit later. She'll focus more on the people and process side. Josh Sutton is manager of our R&D team. Josh has been working with ServiceNow for more than 7 years. Josh is part of a team here that does a lot of think tank stuff. So we don't simply take ServiceNow at face value and kind of push that out to our customers. We're constantly thinking about ways we can integrate with other processes and technologies in an organization and get 1 + 1 = 3. Josh and his team lead us in those areas. So on that note, Josh, I'll turn it over to you to take us on this ITBM journey.
Excellent. Thanks, John. So first, we're going to kind of just go over a little bit of objectives, and I really want to get into what is ITBM Pro. So we'll get into that a little bit, and then we've got a few different use case scenarios, both client perspective that we've done in the past, a little bit of kind of methodology and processes on how we like to do things, and show you kind of the way. So we're not just going to be talking about how to do things in the tool, but it's also taken from a perspective of how to think about things and then be enabled within the platform, right? So what does ITBM Pro mean? So basically, it's ITBM Professional. It's a tier of package with ServiceNow licensing in the ITBM suite. Provides availability to utilize Agile and SAFe components of the ITBM suite, along with investment funding capabilities, predictive intelligence, test management, and the Pro version of other components. So there are other components that you get with ITBM Standard. You get the Pro version of that when you upgrade to that licensing package. We'll address the ones that we don't go into detail in these use cases towards the end of the slide or the presentation. But I also want to just make a couple points here. Work with your ServiceNow and CDW account executive to discuss this further, around licensing and things like that. We're going to be showing how to actually use the components, how to think about them, the processes around them that are included in the package, but we will not be discussing pricing or licensing and things like that. This is truly going to be meant for enablement and knowledge sharing. So the first thing we want to kind of just point out is those red boxes are basically the connection points of the Agile features and with the project management or PPM suite of features. So you can see kind of this kind of high-level life cycle of the idea to demand to project or demand to enhancement, and then when you get to project, how is it integrated and connected with the Agile components. So we're going to be going over a bunch of those different features and the use cases surrounding them as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mara for our first topic of discussion. Mara?
Hey, thanks everyone. Yeah, as Josh said, there are a number of kind of real-world business scenarios that that we often hear about when we're working with our clients, especially when they're on their ITBM or PPM journey. They might start with PPM, but then they start realizing that we're not really working in necessarily a conventional kind of sequential project space world anymore. So how do we take advantage of some of the newer processes and different ways of thinking and still make sure that we're delivering value and making sure that, more importantly, that as PMs, we're really doing a good job of making sure that we're still being diligent with our scope, with our plans, with our financials. So we want to make sure that everything we talk a lot about, make sure that you're delivering value. Make sure that your clients are, and your clients, of course, are your end users if you're doing internal services. Your clients are getting value from what it is that we're delivering. So the first scenario that we're going to talk about is one we encounter often, which is how do we intake processes, or how do we have an intake process that incorporates enhancements and strategic projects? And when we're talking about enhancements, we're kind of talking about all of those non-standard requests, those things that aren't quite catalog items, that are, maybe there's some variability. We still need to collect some requirements to feel good about how to deliver them, but they're not really rising to the level of a project. We don't need the discipline of project management around them. So, many of our customers, and I've worked through this myself, we have trouble with demand management. And it's not that we don't intend to do good demand management, but those non-standard things just kind of keep popping up. They're hard to predict, and our clients need them. So as Josh showed on that life cycle, that's really what comes out of living and working with a capability that you have employed. So it's especially true when you have a single team or a department that works on projects or delivers new functionality and supports existing capabilities. So if you're like a DevOps group or somebody who kind of operates or delivers capability and then has to maintain it, that becomes very difficult to figure out, well, how do I manage my new start efforts, the stuff that's really juicy and I want to make sure it gets out into the wild, but also continuing to create new competencies, new capabilities for my users. So that's that first bullet. And the second one is that we really need a way to handle a variety of those business partner needs when we don't have unlimited resources to support those initiatives. I think all of us would love to be able to say that our IT department can just handle everything that gets thrown at us, but that's just not going to be the case. So even small efforts that don't require a full project are going to take resources. So we need to be able to plan for those so we know how much we can realistically deliver while keeping the lights on, because obviously there's incident management and those standard requests that are part of the service, but also support those planned initiatives. We don't want to compete with the projects. We don't want to compete with the funded needs, and sometimes that happens. It becomes an either-or discussion, and we believe that, that those things can coexist. And so the final point on this opportunity is that our business partners, again, our end users, need the ability to influence the needs and which efforts we tackle first. We don't believe in a first in, first out model. It works fine for a short amount of time, but sometimes these small asks bundle up together and can really be handled as an initiative Maybe you can get some efficiency, some economy of scale. Perhaps we end up having a full project that comes out of it, but also sometimes we get something and that's the first thing that comes in, and so we grab it and we miss an opportunity to handle something that's really impactful to our business, even though it's small. So we want our customers to have a voice because that's going to really give them a sense of partnership, which is a big one. We want to make sure that our delivery teams are considered a partner, not a utility provider to our business. So Josh, if you could move on to the next slide, please. Excellent. So we want to talk about a practical solution. So the practical solution, and one that we often address with customers, is give your end users a single demand intake mechanism. The reason that we say that is because unless we're talking about a large planned funded initiative, frequently our partners don't know if the request that they have needs to be a project, or maybe it can be handled really quickly by a talented team member. You know, they might say, well, I don't know if it's a project. I don't know I don't know how hard it is for you to do this thing. And what I say is they shouldn't have to decide. You know, we want to basically say, come to us. We're happy to help you. We're here for you. And we don't want to put barriers in place that make it clunky for them to get the help that they need. We also often hear that we need a lot more information to process a project versus a small request or enhancement. That's an argument we often hear when we have an end user, or excuse me, a client who hears, you know, I just want this small thing done. I don't want to have to put all this information in there for what seems like a minor effort. And that's true. We often, it's very likely that we can start with the same set of initial information. Kind of give me a description. Tell me about the risks. What's the value you're trying to solve? Because ultimately, we really don't want our clients telling us how to solve the opportunity. We want them to tell us what the opportunity is. We want our talented developers and our designers to come up with a solution. And once we have that small amount of information, that minimal amount, most of our designers can quickly tell if something's small. Like, they're going to have a gut feel. Is this something that we can handle easily, or is this something that is really going to require a tremendous amount of investment, or even just research? So when we can find a small nugget and we can handle it easily, we have the mechanism through ITBM Pro, through our Agile capabilities, to pop that out. We've got a quick exit ramp, and we can pull that out of that full governance cycle to create an enhancement that can be managed by the fulfilling team. Larger initiatives and those that maybe we don't know, they stay in that demand cycle. They go through the due diligence, but we can get things into the fulfillment pipeline a lot faster, and again, make a more satisfying solution for our end users. And as I said, because technically the enhancement record that we're going to be talking about is part of the Agile piece, we have the opportunity to put that into a figurative backlog. We have the ability to say, remember I mentioned earlier that, you know, we want our customers to have a voice in our prioritization. So what we'll do is we will say to our customers, hey, we've done some initial scoping, and this is what we think it's going to take to do this. Is this your top priority, or maybe these other 3 that have come in the last week we should be focusing on? And we know there are some things that are going to be hot, and you're going to have to just take them and run with them, and that's okay. We can accommodate that too. But the idea being that just because it was, again, the first thing in, doesn't mean it's the first thing we have to tackle. Okay. All right, so we're going to walk through this scenario in ServiceNow. And the scenario that we've presented is that our business partners need help from their IT department, but they don't know whether their demand is a project or just a request. And I'm going to use request in quotes. If any of you are ITIL people, that may make you cringe a little bit. That's okay. We're talking about it in this context. So we're going to illustrate how offering one intake method means that customers don't have to think about how to request support. And we're going to show how defining a project, so defining what complexity looks like, what size looks like, what's your risk tolerance, and service scope means that you can make routine work of quickly identifying those enhancements. And that's going to get the work to this delivery team faster. We also need to consider, and this is where the opportunity comes in, to say, allocate your capacity for enhancement work. So the point of that is to say that if you have a team of 4 people And each of those 4 people are responsible for incident management, for request fulfillment, and maybe they've got some project work on the side. You may only have a grand total of 10 hours a week between the 4 of them to do enhancement work, and that's okay. That is an honest conversation to have with your business partners so that they can help you to say within those 10 hours, these are going to be those things that are the most impactful. Let them tell you what to work on as opposed to you trying to guess. Okay. Standing. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to pop into ServiceNow. All right, thank you. All right, so what we're doing is we're actually starting with our portal view. So this is our end user. We're going to give them a very streamlined, clean view. And I've jumped ahead to the form, which is to create a new demand. Some of you are familiar with the idea portal, the idea concept. I'm jumping a little bit ahead of that, and I'm going straight to a demand. If you're interested in talking about idea, Josh and I will be happy to have fun with you about that. But the idea here is that we're going to go ahead and go straight into a demand record. Now, if you're familiar with ServiceNow, you'll remember, and I'm going to show you, that our demand records have a lot of information because they're intended to be something that we use for a business case. But again, as I said, for an end user, we want to really strip that down to the essence. What is it that's going to help our team members get a good gauge on the complexity or what this is going to take to support or deliver, or maybe even should we? So the first thing that I'm going to do is, and this is straight out of box, so nothing unique about this. So you, of course, have the ability to tailor the questions that you ask, but we do recommend that it be very simplistic. And I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to create a sample name. And so I'm going to say that my ideal is to implement ServiceNow ITBM Pro. Okay. And what's the business justification? We want to take advantage of Agile principles. We can go on. I can say the risk of performing. We can say training. Of course, risk of not performing. You guys get the gist. So we'll go ahead and we're going to submit this one. Again, very simple. As an end user, I have really removed a lot of the barriers. I haven't had to decide, was this a project? Was this a small ask? Let's suppose the complexity here. Now, as a demand manager, as an IT team member, remember I'm saying that IT is going to get this, and maybe I'm going to say my ServiceNow team's receiving this. I'm going to pop over to, I'm just going to refresh this real quick, and we are going to have this demand, which we just created. Now, the information that I as an end user entered came over into my business case tab. So all of that good stuff that the client gave you, as much information, if they'd had any attachments, that's all going to be here. And so this is something where your team can now look at it and do some initial assessment. Now, there's a lot that goes into a demand review. But the first thing we're going to advocate is let's give it an initial gut check. You know, if we can maybe capture what application was affected, you know, the nature of what they're asking, and I can say, you know, this is low risk, and this is something that is really easily delivered. Now, in this case, this is probably not going to be a good example, but you know, we can look at that and say this is something that our team can deliver in 6 hours, and maybe that's our tolerance. Maybe that's what it looks like, or a single team would be responsible for delivering it. So we can say that the complexity of our team construct is very low. For whatever reason, this isn't a project. It doesn't need to be managed as a project. So when I do that, you'll remember that in a conventional demand cycle, I've got to go through screening and qualification, approvals, I've probably got some assessments, and that becomes very laborious for something that you already know you're going to deliver. So what Josh and I advocate is simply coming over here to the type field and changing this from a project to an enhancement. Once you do that, you can go ahead and you can save that, and doing so will enable you down here, I'm going to shrink this so I don't have to scroll so much, in the related links to create an enhancement. Now, we advocate structuring this, put some governance around this, don't let anybody go do this. But as maybe your IT manager, maybe as a screening team, you guys have the ability to then push this to an enhancement. Once we create an enhancement, I'm going to show you two things. One is that the enhancement is created. The second is that you'll notice that the life cycle of the demand automatically advanced to approved. So for a reporting perspective, from a metrics and an analytics, you can still see how many demands you approved and whether they were converted to a demand, to a project, or to an enhancement or to a project, or whether nothing happened with them, whether they lived their life. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pop into this enhancement. I'm going to go ahead and open this record. And I'm going to show the fact that you now have the ability, this looks a lot like a project record, but it's a lot lighter weight. So you still have the ability to assign tasks. If you have a team that's operating in an Agile methodology and they use stories, you can create or assign stories to an enhancement. You still get a planned start, planned end date, so you can capture metrics the same way, but you don't have the risks, issues, decisions, actions, changes, the RIDAC. You don't have status reports. You don't have a lot of financial attachment to it. So you really have a very lightweight record that makes it very easy for a delivering team to put this into production. Now, you will notice that we do have some different states on an enhancement record, including scoping and awaiting approval. So this is one way where you do have the ability to hold this into that backlog or do some initial investigation, because it's quite possible that in the light of day, after doing some additional research, you might say, you know, this felt small, but now that we've spoken to our client, this actually seems like it might be a little bit more complicated. So a number of ways where you still have the opportunity to assess this and to do your due diligence, but this gets it into the pipeline, production pipeline, so much faster. Josh and John, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Josh is going to pick back up here and continue the session. Thanks, Mara, for the tour on that part of it. And I mentioned to the whole group how we use ITBM extensively here. One of the ways we use it is when we're working with a client who has project ideas or things they want to do, let's say with ServiceNow, and they're asking for our help. We submit those in our system, and depending upon the state of it as it moves up the food chain in terms of probability of moving forward, it starts to notify our resourcing team. It starts to notify other folks in our organization so they can get ahead of planning and preparing for it. And I know that's made a huge difference for us in terms of our ability to start projects quicker for our customers and also understand where we are in terms of bandwidth and expertise, right? So good stuff to see it in real time. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Mara. So going into the next section is how to embrace an Agile mindset with traditional project methods. Some say hybrid is not a thing. Well, in all reality, we need to be able to make small changes while gaining support, right? So going into this opportunity is looking at a project versus a product mentality or methodology. That's the first rule of Agile. If anybody's very familiar with the Agile principles in the manifesto, that's kind of that thing. You have to shift your vision. And that leads into the strategy as well. Processes to support those use cases need to be adopted and also supported so that you can be successful in that as well, right? So one of the big things that's always hard for people to move into that product or Agile/Scrum activity mindset and methodology is the initial deployment of an application. You say, well, it's got to define scope, and it has a timeline, and it has all these things that traditional project methodologies utilize, but we want to make sure we're doing things in an Agile fashion. So as we look at that as a practical solution, you're going to build out what we call the MVP, or a minimum viable product. You need to get started. You need to get your product at a point where we have an initial launch, right? And again, that's usually the toughest part. So a lot of questions that you need to ask is, what is the reason for implementing this product? Do we have the documented business cases? You know, a lot of those, again, traditional project methodology items to document requirements and things like that. And then also identifying those stakeholders. Do we have a product team for this? Is it a part of a larger, say, platform like ServiceNow that we're implementing a portion of, right? Because, again, we're kicking out, we need to make sure that we have funding, we have resources assigned, and all of that. And that can be difficult to do just in normal Scrum activities. And then also determining, is the project team, we'll call it project, and I'm going to keep doing that, is that your Scrum team? They're going to be dedicated to that. Typically, you want to say yes, right? Because it's an extension of what we'll say your plan is, and the vision, and you're adhering to that vision. And then, does your organization support and understand a product versus project mindset? This is, again, a very tough concept to introduce if it's not buy-in from the top. So as we look at the business case around this, we're going to say the initial deployment of ServiceNow's PPM modules. Why not, right? So going through a use case scenario, an HR department doesn't know where to start with implementing PPM. Right? What do we do? Do we do demand first? Do we do project? How about resources? We don't have any handle around that. Oh, by the way, we also have an HRIS team that's developing in the HR module, and we want them to be a part of it because they're our admins, they're our product team, right? The weakness seen is project management, right? The processes aren't really there, but they have consistency in the tool set, MS Project Online, and everybody knows what to do and everybody knows how to do it. But going back to that first bullet point, intake and demand processes are rock solid. They just don't have something to actually enable that on. So we're going to start with getting the demand processes enabled with ServiceNow, onboard all staff, all of those types of things, and roll it out while we're still utilizing the other project stuff that we are today, because it's already there and it's already consistent and it's already known. So we need to also make sure, as we're building out the stories that are for this minimum viable product, we're not eliminating or putting blinders onto anything else that could lead to what I'll call the next steps, right? So capture those as you're going, but make sure they're not part of that initial launch. So going into the actual demonstration of that, let me just kind of switch over to my demo instance here. And it all starts with, when you look at ServiceNow, the separation of the Agile 2.0, or your Scrum activities, the Agile activities, and PPM, project and demand, and all of those, you still have to make sure that you're working in the respective places, right? So you can't, from a project, do all of the Agile activities or set them up. You have to make sure that you've established that first. So we always say, make sure you have your Agile groups stood up, or your Agile teams, so that you can utilize them with your project. And when we say project, it really could be just looked at as a project, we'll say record, right? We need it for tracking and all those things, and as we get into one of the future topics, it's going to be about, excuse me, what does that mean from an overall portfolio view, right? So if you see here, we've got a hybrid type execution, right? Because we need to establish some of those project type activities, those waterfall activities, to plan and start and all of those types of things. But we're going to be sprinting through. You can also see that we roll, oops, I'm so sorry about that. We're rolling up to the larger portfolio for HR, and that program is the digital transformation program. So we're connecting the dots with our Scrum activities and the project record. As we move over to the planning console, which is your typical Gantt view, it looks a little different than just, say, project tasks and things. You have what are called Agile tasks, and those are notated by this little icon here. And when we actually dive into that, the project record, or the project task, which we typically have, includes this additional Agile tab. and you set the start and end sprints for that Agile phase, notated by the assignment group. So whoever the assignment group is, that's your Agile team. So you populate that Agile team first, and then when you go to select the sprints, those are there. So again, as I stated in the beginning, you have to make sure that you've set those up and you've established the Agile activities and records within that side of the platform before you start getting into this. And if not, obviously go back and you create them and you have them on there. But typically you're already planning for this, so it's part of it. So that's where I have this created, the sprints as the PPM dev sprints. So if we're doing normal Scrum throughout the year, and we know that as of July, we're going to start this PPM implementation, stack your sprints that way. That way, when you get to this project and you're trying to deploy this minimum viable product, you now have those set in your sprint cycle. So if it is one group, that's all you're doing for these next, whatever, 7 weeks, or I'm sorry, 6 or 7 sprints. Okay, so that's really where it connects the Agile things with your project for your minimum viable product. Right? You can name them whatever you want to do. But also you see that we have planning and requirements gathering before that, so we can start building the stories or refining the stories that we've already captured along the way of our other Scrum activities. So the final piece of this I want to show you is also the additional items that we have down here. You have Agile planning and tracking. Very easy to punch out to those other Agile activities and tools within ServiceNow platform directly from the project record. So as we look down here, we also have stories already assigned because they are notated as the project of this project. And we can very easily see which ones are for these different sprints that we have enabled. So that's where they're, again, connecting the dots. If you just select the execution type of waterfall, you do not get those additional things. So that's enabled when you have ITBM Pro, or you're licensed or entitled to the Agile portion of ServiceNow. So the other thing with this too is to make sure that, because you can resource stories, but you can't resource sprints. So we can resource to a project, our Agile team, along with, say, a project manager that's kind of driving this and taking care of those project management activities, so that we are slated for that. Again, going back to what Mara said earlier, we need to make sure that we have view into what we're allocating our resources to. So this is another way to be able to do that and not have to be in a separate Agile or Scrum tool. We're all in the same place, so we're sharing those types of resources, and they're all integrated together. So I'm going to pause really quick. Have we had any questions come in?
Yeah, Josh, actually a couple that might be appropriate right here. So this goes back a little bit. Mara talked about the intake process a bit, and that being a single place. Question was asked about whether it varies, based on implementing something globally. So that's one question. And then you guys have also talked about minimum viable product, and identifying that. Is that generally, when that's attained, is that generally the end of the project? So there's two that I'll tee up there that might be good to tackle versus wait until later.
Sure. How about I take the first one, and then you want to take the second one, Josh?
That's exactly what I was going to recommend. Go ahead, Mara.
All right. I think I can answer the first one pretty quickly. Does it differ if you are doing a global implementation? I'm going to answer that 2 ways because I'm not sure the spirit of what the poster requested. But if you are looking at a global service, that is to say that if I am a central service desk and I manage for an entire enterprise that's globally, you don't have to do any variations. It's entirely possible, and we see it a lot, that you can do some probing questions on a demand form to elicit answers based on the audience. So if you say that you've got somebody in EMEA, you could ask a slightly different question based on where that person's coming from, but still use the same form. The other thing is that if you are saying that I have different services because I service different regions of the world, then you can have different forms that are focused on that region. So for instance, you can say services are different for that region. But ultimately the answer is that as an end user, my experience should always be the same.
Awesome. The second question was around the minimum viable product. And again, why we are using the non-Agile terms as like project to get started, that minimum viable product is definitely your project end state, because we want to move into a release cycle with enhancements and again, things that we captured throughout the course of that project that we can start prioritizing and start sprinting and just start developing, again, on that release cycle. So I would definitely say that that would be the end point of that project. And I'll say if something else comes up, you know, that you need to enable another thing, look at it just as Mara stated out in the very first use case. Do we want to actually go to a project anymore, or because we're now adding on, say, project to our what we initially launched, or resource manage it, or things like that, are we just going to build the backlog and do it organically? That all, I would say, is considered on demand to the business, right? So you'll come across those situations and want to make them, but you already know that you've got them captured in your backlog. So maybe if you do spin up a project where you're just focusing on that, and you need to report up higher, that would be where I say you punch out to a project, a hybrid project like that. Hopefully that answered the question there. So moving on, Mara is going to talk about managing projects that incorporate dependencies on those other teams' Agile activities. So, you know, as opposed to what I showed, we have a team that needs to incorporate a project into launching a new service. This is kind of different, and I'll let Mara get into that.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback really right where Josh left off. So you've got that team that's embracing Agile, that's really kind of operating, that's doing their design and their development. But more and more we're seeing that functionality is being delivered by cross-functional teams. You know, it's really rare that a single team is responsible for an entire delivery. So sometimes we are encountering situations where we might have an infrastructure team that is on a more conventional waterfall or task-based operating model working with a development team. So like Josh was just showing you. And we, as project managers, we want to be able to kind of work all of that together. We don't want to have to, you know, swivel chair from one environment to another, or to risk not having good situational awareness or good visibility over everything that's going on in the effort. So many of the projects are going to include incremental delivery. So just like Josh said, you know, we might start with MVP, and the project is done when we implement and we get that minimum viable product. And then after that, we turn it over to the operations team. So we encourage that, but we don't want the entire organization to feel like they have to adopt Agile. Some teams, it's just not a good fit, or sometimes, you know, we're leaning into Agile, and maybe we've got a couple of, you know, kind of forward-leaning teams that say, hey, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it for the whole organization and see how this works, and then we'll expand it out broader. So while that's happening, we want to make sure that as PMs we have the ability to still get a handle on all of this effort. And then, of course, even though our project teams might embrace Agile principles, our stakeholders might still be looking for more conventional project status reports. They want maybe get the financials. I mentioned the RIDACs. So what we're going to talk about is a way that we can support both of those endeavors. So Josh, if you'll move on to the next slide, please. Right. So as he said, hybrid projects, that's a big one for us. It's one that we take advantage of here. We're going to tease a little bit. We're going to talk about that later. But hybrid projects grant you that waterfall structure with agile flexibility. We're going to talk about in our demo that that project record, you can still have your budget, your schedule, your key activities, and your milestones. And that's going to give your project managers and your stakeholders that traditional ability to monitor your status. But aspects of the project that conform to Agile, or that are again kind of being run by teams that are embracing Agile, can still prioritize their stories, work with some flexibility, even manage a backlog or do sprints. As Josh showed you, and we're going to show you a little more detail, those Agile phases still appear as a work breakdown structure entry, so they can be incorporated into a full schedule, can even incorporate dependencies so the Agile team's work can influence the overall project schedule and project progress. So here's the business case that we're going to be talking about. So we're going to say one project manager is assigned to a project that includes infrastructure and application development efforts. So we're going to say that our client wants to understand the design and costs before work begins. Our application team self-organizes according to Agile principles, and our infrastructure team is using conventional IT operations, which we're going to call waterfall or task-based. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this project up as a hybrid. We're going to build out our project plan and our WBS as a waterfall effort, leading off with requirements and design. And we're going to follow that with a milestone. We're going to say that the design gets approved, and we'll have our Agile phases among our WBS so that the PM can plan schedule, can plan dependencies, and we'll show you what that looks like while our app dev team is maintaining their Agile principles and monitoring their backlog that way. We'll show you how you can do status reports just the same and how everything is incorporated. So let us demo. Excellent. So here we have our active project. You can tell that our project is currently work in progress. We are in green status. It's a brand new project for us. But you'll notice this is our conventional project. The primary difference is that we have, as Josh showed, selected the execution type of hybrid. When we come down to this, and we've got our business case would have any information that we had been collecting. And I'm going to point out here that we've got our financials tab. This is particularly interesting to a lot of our stakeholders, especially some of our sponsors. And so we have a simulated capital, operating expense, and project budget. We're going to be able to manage that through our conventional cost plans, expense plans, cost plans and expense reports, and we'll be able to see how we're doing relative to baseline. But the interesting part is, just as Josh said, we have these phases. So here I've got a whole bunch of project tasks, initiation, design, all of those things. This looks like a pretty standard, project management 5-phase activity, but I've got an Agile phase built in for application development. I'm going to pop over here, as Josh did, to the planning console, because when I'm in the planning console, I want you to see that in here, I am slowly loading. I've got my initiate, so I've got my subtasks, and of course I've got my dependencies logged in here. And I say that I've got my design. My design is going to conduct my requirements workshop. I'm going to analyze my requirements. I'm doing all of that design work up front, and I'm culminating with design approval. Once I have my design approval, I've got two things that are going to happen. One, I'm going to send my infrastructure team out to do their build. We're going to do our equipment procurement, which obviously is going to have a long lead time. And I'm going to also have my network team get going, because we're going to start doing our network plan. We're going to start configuring our routing plan. And then, of course, we'll have our servers. All of this is conventional, right? Everybody's used to this. It's soup to nuts, waterfall. But then we say, but there's another piece that came out of design, and that is we got our requirements for application development. So if I come in here and I look at my application development, I'm actually going to come back over here just for ease, and I come into my Agile phase, once I open this, this looks like a regular project task, just like Josh showed you, but this is assigned I actually clicked on it. That's why it looked a lot like a project. I've got it assigned to that Agile group that Josh mentioned. So this Agile group is uniquely available to this. I didn't have the same 40 or 50 groups that are normally available, only the Agile group. And when I come down here, you'll notice, of course, I can have project tasks. So I can have documentation tasks, I can have release tasks, I can have things that are tied to the execution of this work, but I can also have my stories, just like Josh said. And as this is progressing, as this is advancing, because this is built right into the project record, then any change to this phase is going to influence the overall completion of this project. And actually you can see that we've got some rolled up because we've already done some work. So we've got percentage of work complete. So this idea that your teams that are comfortable, or perhaps because of the work type that you're working in, have to do task-based work, can still do it, but those teams that are leaning toward Agile have the latitude, and as a project manager, you can control both. One other thing I wanted to point out, so we've got our status report. Within our status report, and this is one from the other day, you can see that we have everything included in, so there's nothing that is left out because it's Agile. And if we go over to our analytics, our stories are presented in addition to our tasks. So as a project manager, I can have at a glance visibility on the activities, regardless of whether I'm looking at my waterfall teams or my Agile teams. So I'm going to go ahead, Josh, and hand this back to you and John.
Okay, as we're waiting for Josh there to get us rolling again, we're kind of in the home stretch here. We're going to cover a couple of more things, and then we got a couple more questions all tee up for the group. So Josh, we're back to you.
Thanks, John. Thanks for also making me aware that I was on mute trying to talk.
That was pretty smooth, right? Wasn't
that.
That really smooth of me? Yeah, there you go.
So basically, the last thing, and I've had this at a number of customer cases, and I had it too as I was a platform owner, trying to understand, okay, you've got these requirements from the initial or the larger business, whether it be your VPs or all the way up to the CIO or other areas of the business that need to see, yeah, I understand that you're working and you're doing Scrum activities and you have your product backlog and you're running on that and everything, but how do I see that in my overall portfolio? So its approach is to like managing that yearly product initiative and rolling it up to that larger scale. So basically, just kind of skip past this, getting to the practical solution, we want to utilize an Agile project record. So we have waterfall, we have hybrid, and then we have strictly Agile. And those are the things where we're just doing a project record for the basis that we need to make sure that we're accounting for the pieces that need to be shown in the bigger picture. We don't want to inundate the project or the product team with anything that they need to do. They should be operating business as usual, but we do need to have that line of sight. So ensuring that those minimum activities that we need to capture, that traditional projects are capturing, are also captured. The Agile tasks based on the sprints and those things that we've already showed you a couple times before. Financials and resources, how much cost is this to the overall portfolio of having a product team running concurrently to the other areas of that portfolio? And we, as I stated earlier, we don't want to require that Agile or the Scrum teams to have to do anything on the project record. No tasks, if they need to log time cards because we want to capture actuals and things like that, they have a very clear and easy method of being able to do that. And then the Scrum Master, if needed, Agile purists will argue against this, but depending on the role that we need to do, provide those additional items that need to be captured on the project record. Again, mostly for reporting and roll-up purposes. So business case here is a VP of HR needs to be able to have line of sight into everything that HRIS initiatives, right? We don't want to have to do spreadsheets and PowerPoints and everything. We bought and we have ITBM Pro let's use it and make sure that we can take advantage of it. So by rolling up all of those initiatives under one portfolio, and again, you can labor them on the programs and things like that, we're providing that transparency. And we don't have to look for other means of being able to do this, right? And again, allowing our Scrum teams to truly focus on their Scrum activities. So jumping into the tool, there's just a couple components that I really wanted to show around these. The first one here is, as we stated on the other ones, we have an execution type, but this one is strictly Agile. So we don't really have a lot of the fluff or necessity that some of the project hybrid or waterfall would have. So it strips it down just a little bit. But the other thing too is, remember I talked about the portfolio and the program. I want these associated here so that when we look at the investment portal, which shows all of the HR initiatives, because I have that based on the portfolio, I can see everything, the investments, so our demands and projects, but we have roll-up costing, we have roll-up or collective statuses, and all of those things. And you can see right here, if I expand that just a little bit, the 2021 development team initiatives. We have that as a line item now on all of these other projects that are going on, and then included also with the demands. But as we scroll over, if we need a status, we can say that hey, if we need resources for our Scrum team, yeah, there's other means of being able to do that, right? Our burn down isn't showing us and all of those types of things. But against the larger portfolio, this gives you that mechanism to be able to do that and collectively. Again, going back to the funding of things, when we put resource plan against that 2021 initiative project record, now remember, it's not a project that we're driving, it's just the record to capture those project activities. We are now establishing cost for our development team, and we're allocating them to that in the overall portfolio view. So it's really important to show that. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is an application model. So we have project portfolio management. Say we got that. We can see all the stories and releases and things like that. So as we're utilizing the Agile capabilities, we're truly just sticking in our Scrum activities. The other piece of that is our backlog and things like that. But going back to this, we can see that for the project, we've got these stories for our product team that are related to that MVP project that we showed you earlier. All of the other ones, they're just for the development team initiatives. So again, we're also relating our stories that we're doing based on just our normal Scrum activities, and we're associating to the project as well. Just because we have that detail on the record. Now we've made the connection and we have the full picture of everything that we're doing. So if something maybe needs to punch into that project, we just simply replace what project we're relating that story to, and then move the sprint over to one of those project ones for the minimum viable product. Okay, so it's really, again, just showing you, just because you're doing separate work streams or different things within, excuse me, different teams, doesn't mean we can't see all the data together. So really quickly, we are pressed for time here. I'm going to jump back, and we've kind of detailed throughout this the CDW's real-world practices, right? So the engagement manager setting up the project, and it typically follows a waterfall model, starting with an initiate, a planning, and again, we're launching something for a client of ours that has a specific budget and a specific timeline that they need to do that in. Very difficult to do with standard and traditional Agile methodologies, because you don't typically have a start and an end, or necessarily even a scope. It could be fluid. So we need to establish that. But when we go to implement and actually build, we are invoking the Agile methodology, right? We're doing sprinting because we have to point for a sprint. We're doing showbacks. We're doing refinement as we're going through. Do we want to put this in first sprint? or the last sprint, anything in between. But then we're also capturing in the backlog for that Agile team anything that we're leaving out of scope that doesn't adhere to that minimum viable product. And then your engagement manager is actually executing on those project and traditional waterfall methodologies. So again, punching into the MVP of the project, the aftermath we call it, we're building that as we go along. We're capturing those things, one, so they're not forgotten about, right? If they were important then, we should probably capture them and come back to them. Number two, we are making sure that we have ongoing enhancements already built so we can start sprinting right away, right? And from a, I would say, time perspective, we're also allowing for no gap. And your users that are utilizing the products that you've now launched are able to provide feedback, and you're able to get that right into the backlog, right? So that's kind of how, when we think about our project methodology, we want to make sure that we have at the end of that some continuous improvement, or we have other offerings that can be able to do that. And just to get all of those pieces that we talked about earlier, the alignment planner workspace, investment funding, Scrum programs, also the integrations for Jira and Azure DevOps. So if you have dev teams that do not touch my cheese, right? I'm using Jira and I'm going to use it. That doesn't prevent us from building the stories in ServiceNow for the BAs, say, right? They want to capture the requirements and build the stories and do all of that, and we can tie them back, as we showed you the different methods of interaction between project and Agile. They can still operate in their Jira tool, but we've got the data. So we're able to collect that in one place as a source of truth of data, not necessarily the system of action, which is being done in Jira. And then as those things move along in Jira, they're coming back and we're getting updates within ServiceNow. So these are all, collectively, everything that we're looking at being able to take advantage of when you do grow to pro on your ITBM journey. So moving on really quickly to how can we help with this? Mara, do you want to talk a little bit quickly about the advisory services process engineering?
15-second overview. Yes, so we can help with process. We can help have these conversations. If you have something that's particularly unique and needs to be custom designed to support your organization, we can certainly help with that. We've got a number of people who are very capable in portfolio and program management.
And then moving into the PPM Jumpstart, it's really getting your journey started. Starting small and then going, again, establishing a minimum viable product that you can take advantage of right away and then enhance and build upon. That's another one of our offerings that we have. So I think we are out of time, but I want to make sure that, John, do you want to take first 2 seconds?
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Mara. We are at the end of time. There's a couple of questions out there, but I think we'll take those offline. We'll follow up directly with those folks. And I wanted to leave everyone who is still on with a big thank you, but also an offer. If part of what you saw today seems like it could help your organization and you'd like us to come and have a meeting just with your team, tailor some of this messaging. So whether you're thinking of ITBM, you don't have it yet, or you have it and you're trying to take it to the next level, as a CDW customer or as a member of this session, we're happy to set up a personal session for your team. We'll take this and we'll pare it down, we'll tailor it to where you're at, and be happy to deliver some value in kind of a lunch and learn or workshop session. So feel free to reach out to us on that. And thanks so much for all of you that joined. We'll follow up with those that had some questions still, and everybody that attended will get a link to this so they can share it internally as you see fit. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.